mind to slide that down a little bit for me, or the pulpit slide, because I'm getting some feedback. Yeah, I think so. Well, Phil did a really good job of what I was going to do in the opening of my message, so I'll just kind of point to some of the things he said and maybe add a couple of different things. But imagine the chaos in that temple with the selling of the animals. Now, we know that some of this was necessary, but it didn't have to be in the temple. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I don't know, maybe I'm part dog, but it's hurt my ear. Chaos, that's where I was. Chaos in the temple. Sorry about that. And I'm not sure exactly if they had to do it in the temple. And of course they didn't have to do it in the temple. But they had to sell the animals and they had to change the money because they could only accept the money that was approved by the temple for that exchange. So the animals had to be sold. It was Passover. It was a time where pilgrims from all over the world who were Jews would come back to Jerusalem. And they would worship at the temple and make sacrifices. It was something that they had to do as part of their religious duties. And so those animals needed to be sold and the money needed to be exchanged, but as Phil said, not in the court of the Gentiles, not inside the temple. I mean, I can think of several issues. One is you've got people from all over the world coming back. So the multiplication of the number of people who were in that area were in the thousands from what they were used to. You can imagine the streets were just crowded and clogged with people trying to get into the temple courts and the temple area, and how crowded that was, let alone the money changers talking and the people selling the cattle and the doves and the sheep. But who here has ever tried to house train a cow? My point exactly. It had to be a very interesting situation in that area with the sheep and the cattle. Just a horrible thing. Now, the temple was a holy place. The temple was a place where it was thought that God resided in the Holy of Holies of the temple. This was God's house. This was God's house. And it was being profaned by all of this clutter and clatter and by the smells and by the cattle that were there. And as I thought about that, I thought we wouldn't bring a bunch of cows in here. I'm still thinking about that ice cream thing. But anyway, we wouldn't bring a bunch of cows in here and have a bazaar during our time of worship and selling things back and forth and stuff like that. We would profane the holy things of God, wouldn't we? And the more I thought about that, I thought, well, maybe I better figure out what are the holy things of God. And so I went to the dictionary just to make sure I was on the right track. And it says this, the word holy, it says, specially recognized or declared sacred by religious use or authority, consecrated. An example would be holy ground. Dedicated or devoted to the service of God, or to the church or of religion. And I thought about that, and so what that's telling me is anything that we use in the service of the church or the service of God that's been set aside is holy. So the baptismal font, it's just simply made out of wood and there's a little silver bowl in there, but that becomes holy because it's set aside for God's use. These candles become holy because we use them in worship of God and setting aside. This building is holy. But there's more than that. What about the celebration of Christmas? In that definition, would that be holy? Set aside for God? Well, we would think it would be. We would hope it would be. But is it? Do we treat that as holy? Or is that profane? Do we use that as the time when we really set aside to worship God and to think about God's accessibility, coming as an infant in a manger, coming to the poor and the lowly as one of us? Or do we use it as a time to go out and go shopping and running up our credit cards and getting more in debt so we're upset and concerned and nervous about what life is going to be like the next month when we have to pay these bills? Do we take Christmas and make it secular? Do we worship Santa Claus or do we worship the Christ? We can profane something that's been set aside to be holy and make it unholy. How about relationships? Marriages. I mean, we know that 40 to 50, depending on who you read now, 40 to 50% of all marriages end. And there are some marriages that probably, unfortunately, should end. But God has set up marriage as something that's holy, something that represents it's a microcosm of our relationship with God. Who knows what the rings in a wedding symbolize?
Eternity.
Eternity? Any other guesses?
Unity.
You're not being forceful enough. I'm still hearing it.
Eternity.
Okay, eternity. Okay, I heard that one. Anything else?
No beginning and no end. No beginning and no end.
Continue to circle life, go in. Let's get into eternity things there. No. I would have said, and actually in the old days it probably did. In a non-Christian marriage, it was a sign of ownership. It was the ring. The man didn't wear a ring, and the woman did as a sign that that man owned her. That was a symbol of ownership. That's why I try and talk the ladies out of not saying who gives away this woman to be married to this man, because it's an exchange of property is what we're talking about. But a lot of like that old language. But anyway, but that's not what it means in a Christian church either. If you listen carefully at the next wedding, when you're in a Christian marriage, you will hear the pastor say, these rings are an outward and visible sign of an inward and spiritual grace, signifying the union of Jesus Christ and His holy church. Interesting. That's said at every Christian wedding. I would assume that's said at every Christian wedding you go to. And that's interesting, that's what it is. It's a microcosm of our relationship with God as the body of Christ, the bride of Christ, the church. It's represented in a Christian wedding by the ring. By the ring. How do we treat our relationships? How do we treat the person that we say we love the most, that we live with? How about other relationships? Let's get outside of marriage. How do we treat other people? Do we profane the holy? God has made us to be in relationship. He's made us social beings. He created us for His love, that He might pour His love out upon us, and that we might love Him and love others. Do we profane the holy by the way we live in relationships, by the way we treat the people that are special to us?